Welcome! This video is about the deep-seated and underlying feelings and perspectives from both sides of the issue surrounding the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, there have been protests on the street in Ferguson, and it has come in the aftermath of a fatal shooting by a white police officer of a black 18-year-old citizen. Now, first let me say that the loss of life here is tragic. It doesn't even matter what the facts were. It's just the loss of life was tragic, and I think everybody would agree on all sides of the perspectives. And indeed, I think the nation, the entire nation, extends the condolences to the family of this young black man who lost his life in Ferguson. So the purpose of the video here is to present both sides of the case in a fair and balanced way. I'm trying to be fair to both sides, but really sort of give you the straight shot as to what each side would say. And I know that's going to be no easy task because this is such a highly charged situation. I'm sure I'm going to upset and offend people from both sides, and I apologize for that in advance. So one question is the problem race? Now, there was some very interesting polling that was done, and the results came back recently, and you saw a huge difference between the white respondents to the poll and the black respondents to the poll. So the black respondents to the polls, a large majority of them said, yes, race is the problem. And I think what they're saying there is, look, you got a white cop shooting a black citizen. Yes, race is the problem. But also, I think implicit in that is that what they're saying is, the reason the guy was shot is because he was black. If he weren't black, if he were white, he would not have been shot. Okay? So if you look at the white side of this, right, the white respondents, a large majority of the white respondents said, no, race is not an issue. Okay? So what are they saying there? And I think what they're saying there is that the suspect was shot not because of his race, but rather he was shot because of his conduct. He was shot because of his actions, because of what he was doing. Now, the facts aren't out necessarily in this case in Ferguson. We don't exactly know what happened, but I'm speaking sort of more generally here because Ferguson was just one in a long series of shooting incidents like this with a white cop shooting a black person that has caused outrage going back for a number of years. So just in general, I think that is why the white respondents are saying no, race is not an issue, because I think they're saying no, it's about conduct, not about race. So implicit in what they're saying is, if the suspect had been white, the suspect still would have been shot if that suspect were engaging in the same sorts of conduct and threatening conduct or violent conduct. So which side's right? Is it about race or is it about conduct? And I think you have to say it's a mix of both, but I do not think that you can just dismiss race because, one reason is because so many people believe that it's about race, that race is a factor, that I think you have to consider race. You have to address the question of race. But race is not the only factor. Another factor is the socioeconomic factor, which is, class. So you have sort of the middle class, almost pitted against the underclass. The middle class represented by the white cop, a police job, a nice middle class job, shooting somebody, a member of the underclass. Okay, so that is, a problem in and of itself. But when you mix those two factors together, race and class, you have a very volatile situation that is ripe for discontent and unrest, and I think that is what we're seeing playing out now in Ferguson. So let's jump into the two arguments here, the two sides. So what are the two sides? The two sides are the enforcement side and then the protester side. So the enforcement side on one hand and the protesting side on the other hand. So let's take the case first of the enforcement side. And by enforcement side, what I mean by that is certainly law enforcement and the police, but not just them. I would also include a broad sector of society that believes that communities should be protected from crime, and so they believe in strong law enforcement. Okay, so it's a broad sector of the society, including probably some of the people, some of the white people who responded to that poll and said that they don't think race is an issue. They would probably be included in this enforcement community. Okay, so the enforcement community, the enforcement side, what would they say? I think what they would say is, look, we all want to live in a society that is safe from crime. Okay, citizens in a society, law-abiding citizens, should be able to go out in their communities, walk on the streets without having to worry about being accosted and mugged and harmed or even killed. And people want to be free to run their businesses, you know, to run their businesses in a community without having to worry about being robbed and held at gunpoint, harmed, or even killed. And in order to do that, society needs a police force to protect the innocent citizens from the criminals who would harm the innocent citizens. So you need a police force to do that. And by the way, these cops are heroes. And the reason that they're heroes is because they put their own lives on the line, their own lives at risk in order to protect and safeguard society. And that is a noble act, and they should be revered and respected. Again, this is what the enforcement side would say. So they would say that these cops, in their job, they put themselves on the front lines, and they are at the point of contact with dangerous suspects and dangerous criminals out in the community. And because they do that, we need to protect the police force. The cops need to be able to protect themselves. So we need a rule that says, you know, when the cops are out there on the front line and, you know, the suspects cause problems or create violence with the cops need to be able to use overwhelming force against these criminals. If you balance it and say, okay, whose rights should we protect more? Should we protect the violent criminal who's threatening the lives of the cop, or should we protect the cop? The cop's always going to win. They're going to protect the cops against the violent criminal. Okay, so you know, that's what the law enforcement side would say. They'd also say in the enforcement community, they would also say that, you know, these kinds of things are to be expected, because whenever you have the cops going out and making the point of contact with the dangerous suspects, you are going to have these situations. You're going to have people that get hurt. And, you know, I wish it weren't that way, but it is that way. That's the reality of life. And that's what we're seeing in Ferguson. This is just another one of those situations of the cops, you know, confronting, you know, the dangerous suspects. People are going to get hurt, and that's what we see here. Now, you might say, all right, well, that sort of makes sense that, you know, we want a society to be free from crime and you need cops to protect the community. That's fine. But what we don't want is cops out there just shooting and killing members of the community. That's not right. And I think what the enforcement community would say in response to that is, listen, this is what we would say to everybody. It doesn't matter, race, class, whatever. Everybody would say the same thing, which is, if you don't want to have problems with the cops, it's very simple. You just do two things. One, don't commit crimes, okay? And two, whatever you do, even if you've committed a crime, whatever you do, don't resist arrest, okay? Don't fight with the cops. Okay, this is what causes the problem, because when you fight with the cops or create an altercation or a conflict with the cops, now you've just cranked it up. That is what actually creates these problems, because now the cops are at risk, and you know, any citizens who are in the vicinity are at risk, and in fact you yourself, you the suspect, are putting yourself at risk by fighting with the cops. So the cops now have to come in and use overwhelming force against you, and that's when people would get hurt. So if you just wouldn't fight with the cops, then you'd be fine. When the cops come to arrest you, what you should do is just agree to be arrested peacefully. Total peace. And then the cops would take you down to the court, and then you can make your case to the judge. If you think you're innocent or wrongly arrested, and if the cops mistreat you, then you can sue them for civil rights violation and you can end up a millionaire. Okay, but if you fight with the cops, then it creates a whole bunch of problems. In fact, the job of a cop is not to determine guilt or innocence on the street. The job of the cop is only to pick the suspect up from the street and take him to the court. And then in the court, the suspect can, you know, determine guilt or innocence. So if you're fighting with the cops on the street, that is what is causing all of these problems. So the cops, or the enforcement side, I think would also say that this, you know, this slogan of hands up, don't shoot, they would say, this is exactly the opposite of the truth, because the truth is that it's the cops who are begging people, please put your hands up. That's what we want you to do. We want you to put your hands up. If you put your hands up, you won't get shot. The people who are getting shot are the people who are not putting their hands up. They are the people who are struggling or resisting arrest or refusing to go along with what the cops tell them to do. That's what you shouldn't do. That's what's causing all these problems. Okay, so that's what the enforcement community would say. So in essence, I think they would say, look, just don't commit crimes, and don't resist arrest. Don't fight with the cops. And if you do those two things, then you're not going to be shot by the cops and you're not going to be hurt by the cops. Okay. So that actually sounds kind of reasonable. So what would the protesting community say? What would the protesting side say? Let's hear the other side of the story. Okay, so I think the protesting side would say, well, they'd say a few things. Actually, they are saying some things that I don't really think go to the heart of the case. Let me mention those just very quickly because I think you're going to be hearing those couple of those arguments. One of those arguments is that the protesting side sometimes says, well, it's really the cops' fault. The cops are the ones who start it. The cops are the ones who go out and, shoot people with no reason or, start altercations with no reason. And I just don't think this goes to the heart of the issue. Now, certainly, let me say, we should investigate every single incident, and we definitely want to be sure that the cops are not overstepping their bounds. And in fact, when you give someone authority like the police have authority when they do their job, there's always a temptation that an individual is going to abuse that authority. And that we've certainly seen that a lot with the cops. So we absolutely need oversight of the cops to be sure they're not abusing their authority. But it just seems to me that this doesn't go to the heart of the issue because we're not really plagued with an epidemic of, cops just shooting innocent people on the street or going around causing fights with innocent people on the street. It does seem that, these difficult situations come up in an altercation kind of situation. So that's why I don't think that goes to the heart of the issue. And another thing that you might hear from the protesting community is that the cops use too much force in response. Okay, and again, I think we do need to investigate each time an incident happens to be sure that the use of force is not disproportionate. But I also think this does not go to the essence of the issue, because if that's all we were talking about, then you have a situation where, okay, everybody agrees that the suspect is the one who's causing all the problems. The suspect is the one who's causing the violence, and then the cops, the question is, well, was the cops' response proportionate? And that's always, difficult. Monday morning quarterback, most of the time you're going to deem that it's going to be fine. So that, to me, that doesn't seem to be what's causing the problem. So what is the heart of the issue then? What is going on? What is causing all of this discontent and causing people to come out and protest in the streets? And I think what the protesting side would say is this. I think they would say that our society has resulted in the creation of a marginalized underclass at no fault of their own. Okay, so these people get, born into this underclass, this marginalized underclass, and they're not able to escape it, and they feel like they're forced to stay down in that marginalized class, right? And they're forced, in fact, by gunpoint. They're stuck in the marginalized class at gunpoint. And that is what is the source and the root behind all of these problems. So these people feel trapped by society. They feel trapped. They feel like they're boxed in from all sides. There's no escape from this miserable situation that they're in. I mean, they live in terrible neighborhoods, right? They have substandard housing, terrible overcrowding problems. They're plagued with crime, right? There's no law enforcement in their community that's solving all this crime. There's crime everywhere. Nobody feels safe. I mean, imagine that. If every day you don't feel safe. Your family's not safe. They have substandard schools. They have inadequate community services. I mean, on and on. These places are not good places to grow up in or to have the fluke of being born in, right? And they also don't have enough money. Okay, it's a constant struggle trying to keep their head above water every day, just eking out an existence. And there's no way for them to really get to increase the amount of money that they have. I mean, there's no jobs in these neighborhoods. There's no good jobs in these neighborhoods. Okay, so it's a very difficult circumstance that they're in. The only jobs that are available is just unreasonable toil for long hours at extremely low wages that is not even enough to keep their head above water in their miserable conditions. Never mind climbing up the ladder and trying to get out of that marginalized class. They're stuck in that marginalized class because there's no avenue out. So it's society that has created this marginalized class and that offers no avenue for escape from that. They offer no avenue for success, no avenue for opportunity for these people. So, these people feel like they don't have an optimistic future. There's no reason for hope. And they look at their generations who have preceded them, their parents and their grandparents. They're in the same situation. They were born in the same situation and they're dying in the same situation. Nobody's able to get out. They're all trapped. So this makes them feel very trapped. Now, this fosters anger and frustration and resentment. And this goes on day after day, year after year. It builds, it builds, it builds. This anger and frustration of being trapped in a marginalized underclass builds and builds and builds. And it makes these people susceptible to crime, far more susceptible to crime than someone who's born into a comfortable circumstance where they don't really need to, defend themselves from somebody who's going to try to steal their stuff or harm them or put themselves in a situation where they need to steal in order to, just have decent things, right? So they are far more susceptible to crime. They're also far more susceptible to drugs and alcohol because everybody's unhappy, so they're turning to drugs and alcohol are prevalent in the community. That makes them even more susceptible to crime, right? So you have this very difficult situation, and then when they actually turn to crime, when they actually cross the line and slip up and turn to crime, what happens? They are met with a very harsh response from the cops, right? The cops come down like a ton of bricks on them. They throw the book at them. They're more likely to go to jail and more likely to go to jail for a longer period of time. And once they're in jail, they get trapped in this downward spiral of the criminal justice system. Then, they become more socialized with hardened criminals. They join gangs. They start living a lifestyle of crime. It's a revolving door in and out of the justice system, and their whole lives, before you know it, 10, 20, 30 years has gone by. Half of that is spent in jail, and it's just a recipe for a lifestyle that's on the downward track. That they can't get out of this marginalized class. So this creates a very grim outlook in the minds of these people on society overall. They say, look, this society is not fair, because I am trapped in this marginalized underclass that the society has trapped me in at no fault of my own. It's not fair. And there's no, chance for me to live a, fulfilling and happy life. And then that's reinforced by the police. When they see the police coming into their neighborhood, the police represent this society that has marginalized them. And why are the police coming into their neighborhood? Police are coming in their neighborhood to grab them and throw them in jail, right? So the whole situation is just not good. Then, when you have a shooting situation, like the situation in Ferguson, when the middle-class white police officer comes into their neighborhood and shoots and kills one of their own, this is a flashpoint, okay? This unleashes all of this frustration of being trapped in this, marginalized circumstance. It just unleashes that and gives expression. So people feel very angered. It's a reminder that we are trapped in this marginalized situation, and if, we do anything, we cross the line, we're going to be shot and killed. Okay, so that is what these people are feeling, and that, I think, is what the protesting side would say. That is the response of the protesting side. So who's right? Which side is right? Is it the enforcement side is right, or is it the protesting side is right? And I think what you have to conclude is that both sides are right. I mean, both sides have legitimate concerns. On the enforcement side, the enforcement community is right that we should be able to create a society where people are safe and free from crime. And you need police to do that. That's all makes sense. But the protesting side is right too, in that it's not fair for these people who are trapped in this marginalized underclass. They have disadvantages that the rest of the people don't have. So they're right also. So I know what you're thinking, and what you're thinking is, okay, well, what's the solution? I know, it's a good question, but that's the hard part. Look, unfortunately, I don't think there's any quick and easy answer. I mean, if there were, all these talking heads on TV, they'd be saying, really insightful stuff, and nobody's saying any insightful stuff. And if it were quick and easy, someone would have thought of it by now, and we wouldn't have these problems. But these are very deeply entrenched, difficult problems. But I guess I would say a couple things, just to throw some stuff out there on the side of optimism here. I guess I would say, one thing that I do think would be helpful is if each side were able to acknowledge that the other side has legitimate concerns. You know, you just don't hear any of that. Both sides are so polarized. You know, so it would be great if the protesting side were able to say something like, you know what? We understand why the officer pulled the trigger. We understand it. We understand that the officer was in a difficult situation. You know, there was the fog of the conflict. The officer felt a threat and was just trying to protect himself or protect other people, whatever the situation was. We understand why the officer pulled the trigger. Okay, can you imagine if protesting side actually came out and said that? That would be pretty impressive, I think. And by the same token, you need the enforcement community to acknowledge the problems that are going on that are causing these things. So the protesting community the enforcement community to come out and say, you know what? We acknowledge that these people are trapped in difficult circumstances and they feel frustrated and they are more susceptible to cause crime. And so those feelings that they have are legitimate. We understand that and we need to help them and we need to solve it. That would be impressive too. Now I know that's not going to solve the problem, but what it would do, I think, is it would bring these people closer so that they could start to at least work together towards coming up with solutions that are going to solve this problem, as opposed to people just being completely polarized and in their own corners. You know, I guess, we do need a solution, though. I mean, at the end of the day, we do need a solution. I don't know what that solution is, but I would say that I kind of feel that the solution is along the lines of, you know, one of the big problems that's plaguing our society overall of income inequality. I mean, it's just not fair. You've got a small people, small population of people at the top who are sucking up an enormous amount of wealth and resources all for themselves, and leaving, this ever increasing class of marginalized people at the bottom. And it's just not fair. If you pull back and look at the big picture, look at society overall, and you see that this is what your society consists of, I think you'd say, that's not a fair society. That's not the kind of society we should have. So I think we do need to solve that problem of income inequality, and I think that would help this situation. I mean, look, we are all in this together. We are all human beings living on the same planet. Now, we come in all sorts of different sizes and shapes and colors and even abilities, but that shouldn't matter for living a decent life. So I think we do need to come together and figure out a system that's fair for everybody, and a system where we can all live together in peace. So that's the video. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.